Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina, I'm the host here, and my guest today is Jimmy Andrade. Hi, Jimmy.
Hello, how are you?
Good. So I loved meeting you at Rhinebeck because I feel like we sort of got to chat there on the podcaster hill, and we met other people who were guests on my channel. And of course, I got to admire your beautiful sweater. So this particular sweater, I'm friends with Julie Knits in Paris, who is the designer for this sweater. And when I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, because it's something that you don't really see much. And of course, it's based on the La Sagrada Familia, which is the famous church in Barcelona.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
what's your connection with this sweater? Like, why did that sweater made it into your queue, and why did you need to knit it?
Well, because I am very good friends with Julie. Did a collaboration because this was designed for the very first Barcelona Knits Festival,
Right.
and she did a collaboration with Chile Knits. The owner of Chile Knits, the dyer, her name is Connie, and she's from Santiago in Chile, and I'm very good friends with her. She is a very dear friend, and so that's how I got uh, to see this design. And actually, I saw this colorway first before anybody else because she sent me like a test skein to test it. So
I
yeah,
absolutely love this particular combination because it does look like the windows at the La Sagrada, you know.
yeah, it's absolutely. I love. Yes, it looks
Um,
like stained glass.
right. So the thing that impresses me the most about you is that you're not a lifelong knitter. Like you started knitting relatively recently.
Yes, very late, very late.
But the amount of things that you've knitted and the difficulty level of the things that you've knitted like really blows me away. And not
Thank
only
you.
that, but you managed to become an instructor at Vogue Knitting Live in like
Yeah,
explaining how to create the perfect sizing for anybody, right? Or how to change the models that were created for women to fit men.
right.
How do you explain your progress? How do you explain like the amount of knitting you've done and the difficulty level of the things you've done?
Um, well, I don't know how to explain, but I liked it. I started crocheting, and very quickly jumped into knitting. Knitting at first scared me. The idea of like the two needles and hooking the yarn with smooth needles didn't really make much sense to me. The crocheting did because there's a hook at the end of the crochet needle, and that like you could hook the yarn. So that's what I went for first. But then I saw some brioche knitting online, and I was like, how do you do that? I want to do that thing with two colors and like that reversible thing that you can really do like very well with crochet. So I jumped into knitting, and I fell in love with knitting right away. And I just wanted to knit all the things. And I think it was just practice, right? Like seeing things that inspired you that you wanted to make, and then just jumping and doing them.
Can you please tell me that brioche wasn't your very first knitting project?
It was not my first, but it was very soon after, like that, because that's what made me jump into knitting, is when I saw these things, there's two-sided fabric with two colors, and I was like, how do you do that? I want to do that. And I started like looking online, and I was like, I'm going to learn how to do that, and I'm going to do it.
So is that how you learn? Like you went online, you went on YouTube and you just learned how to knit, or like did somebody teach you?
No, yeah, I went online. I grew up I grew up in Mexico. I grew up in a very small rural town, really a village, like that, 1,000 people when I was growing up in Mexico. And all the women in my community would knit. That includes like my mom, my sisters, my grandmother. But I never learned, but I did watch them do it, right? So eventually, growing up, my mom would make my knits. right? I would just be like, Mom, can you make me a sweater? Can you make me a hat? You know, like the typical thing that like, you know, Latino mama's boys do. And Latino moms are very like pleasing. So they're like, sure. So I had no need to learn. And eventually my parents retired and they moved to Mexico, right? And I thought, oh shoot, who's going to make my knits for the winter? Because they moved in the summer, right? And my birthday is in the summer. And for my birthday, I decided instead of bothering other people with my knitting needs, I can do it. I can do it myself. I have 2 hands. I can do it. So I got myself some yarn, some like acrylic yarn, some hooks at first. And I went online and started like on YouTube and started investigating how to do it. And that's how, but I do think that I did have, you know, watching all these women knit all the time, like you have no, like, you know, you learn to see how they hold the needles and things. So I think that they taught me somehow when I was little. It was there. I just didn't know how to put it together until I watched some videos on YouTube.
Well, you're talking about Latin community and you're talking about all these women knitters. Were there ever male knitters that you knew like back then growing up? Or was that like something frowned upon, like men had to do the macho men?
Yeah, right. I think particularly in my community, I don't think there were any male knitters that I can remember. There was one guy in a neighboring village that did embroidery, and very pretty embroidery. But I think that in his childhood, I think he had an accident and he lost the ability to walk. And so I think that even though it was frowned upon, I think that it was allowed for him to do like woman's work because of his disability, right? So people accepted it. Not, you know, they didn't give him a hard time about it. And actually they bought his stuff because he made beautiful embroidery stuff. But I think that's the only man that I saw like doing this kind of work growing up.
So when you started crocheting or knitting, what was the reaction of your family? Like, how did they react to you doing this craft?
They did it. I think that, but I started in my mid-30s, and actually that's something that in my head I had to overcome, right? That's one thing that I had to say, like, I'm 30 something. I was like turning 33, and I was like, it doesn't matter whether this is something that you know, people around me did or did not. I can do it, and that's all I need. So I kind of like, I didn't present it in a way as like, what do you think? I just, you know, made stuff and gave them gifts of like knit stuff, and I didn't really ask them if they thought it was. So they were just like, oh. And my sisters, I think because my sisters are knitters, they appreciate the work. So I think that that's like one of the things that they went for first, right? Like, oh, this is like beautiful work, and right, this is so nice, and thank you. So they appreciated the work more than like it's a guy doing it. So,
well, I have a question about that, right? Yeah. So when you knit for your family now, are they blown away that like you're a better knitter than they are? Are you a better knitter than they are?
Well, I might be, at least with the brioche, because the brioche is not a tradition that my family grew up in, right? So brioche is something that they're not very familiar with, and especially 2-color brioche. So whenever I've made like 2-color brioche, and then if I do like lace brioche, I did a lace brioche shawl for my mom once. And my mom was very impressed because she said that she wouldn't even know how to begin making.
What kind of things were they knitting when you were growing up?
I think just like basic, you know, scarves, hats, lots of lots of like little things for babies, right? Like onesies or little sweaters for babies and things like that that they would just give to their friends or to us, right? Like the younger ones, whatever. Right. Yeah.
So, okay, so how did it happen that you became a Vogue knitting instructor?
Well, that happened because Lois, Brooklyn Boy Knits, recommended me. We're very good friends, and we know each other from the New York City knitter circles, and we've been knitting together for a long time. So I think that he knows about my abilities and what I can do, and he recommended me, and that how they took me in.
How did it feel?
Oh, it was very exciting, especially because I got to do it in Spanish, right? Which is something that Lois knew that I am fluent in Spanish. So that was very exciting for me, actually, because that meant I have a podcast that has been a little bit of a hiatus for now, but I have a podcast that is in English and in Spanish, and a lot of people respond to my podcast in Spanish from different parts of Latin America and Spain, right? And so that was a nice opportunity to be able to teach and to reach out people from all over Latin America that otherwise might not be able to like come to a yarn festival in the US to take a class or something like that. So that was very exciting, actually. I was very excited and very thrilled. And I think my students were too. I got to see some of the results and they were very happy. So that made me feel good.
Right. Were you nervous at all?
Oh my God, I was so nervous. Yes, I was so nervous. Yes.
Because I can't even imagine, like, you're relatively new knitter and there you are put in the position of an expert and you have to teach not a simple class, not the basics of knitting, but we're talking about like a complicated thing, right?
Right.
Did you doubt yourself at all, like before you got onto that class?
Well, not so much about the material because that's something that I had to learn pretty early on about, like the class was about adapting. The first class that I did was about adapting sweaters to your body. And most of the designs that are out there, the designs that I like, that I think are pretty, tend to be designs that are meant for women's bodies. And I don't have a woman's body. I'm a tall, big guy, so I had to learn pretty quickly to adapt the numbers to my body. So I was pretty confident about like the material. It was the online teaching, right? Because you don't like, it's easy to see when people are struggling. When you see them, they're next to you, you see them in their like the expressions in their face or something. But online, I was like, what if they're struggling? How am I going to know? Or am I going to have enough time? So things like those are the ones that I was freaking out about.
So after the class, was there something you wish you would have done differently? I just wish I had more time to talk about like more different aspects, right? Because it was a very basic, it was like a 2-hour class, so it had to be like a very basic sort of thing. And we can really expand into like different sort of like shapes or thing, right? It was more like a basic sort of like this type of sweater, right? That we had to cover. So let's talk about your first experience with changing the pattern of the sweater. So you pick up a sweater for a woman and you're like, okay, how the heck am I gonna make it work for myself? What was that process?
Well, I must confess that something that I guess I didn't mention earlier is that my mom in this village that I grew up, my mom was basically like the village seamstress, right? She would she's the one that would sew like things for women in the village and for us too, right? So even though she didn't teach me anything about construction, I would, sit at the table doing my homework while she was working. Because she, the community table for us is where she would work and we would do our homework. And so I think that I also knew a little bit about like structure of garments. So I wasn't so clueless, I think, when I approached it. So I kind of knew, right, like that I had to like measure, because I would see my mom measuring, like when women would come to our house and they wanted a new dress or a new blouse or something, that I would see like that she would measure the chest, the back, the length. So I knew like about like what sort of things to look for to adapt to my sweaters, I think.
Right. When did spinning started taking place?
Oh, that was more recent. That was about like maybe 4 years ago when I started.
Why did you feel like you already figure out everything about knitting and you needed new challenges in life?
Not at all. Not at all. I still consider myself learning in terms of knitting, right? Because you always want to learn, I think. No, but I the spinning thing was for me was more like a magical thing, right? Like I would see people with fiber, right? Like this fluffy thing that would turn into yarn that you would work with, and I would like, how do you do that? I want to see how you do that. I want to experience making that, and for that I did take a class here.
Was it difficult to learn?
I don't think it's difficult to learn, but it's something that takes practice.
Anything difficult for you to learn?
Yeah, chemistry.
At least
terrible
something.
at chemistry.
So, do you have a favorite fiber? Like, how is that another rabbit hole that you just found yourself falling into?
Yes, unfortunately, yes. That was. I also, just like with the knitting, I fell in love with spinning, and I think that actually I love spinning more than I love knitting. That I will say, I think that is true, because I get a very different experience from spinning, and yeah, so that was interesting in terms of like the things that the blends, right? Like the types of sheep that you could work with, because when you're knitting and you buy yarn, you buy what there is, right? Like the type of blend that you can that is been made for you. And with spinning, you learned about like different sheeps, and then you can make your own types of blend, right? You buy a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you can start blending it and make your own yarn. So I like that creative aspect, and that also, that, like you say, that's a totally different rabbit hole that it can be very dangerous to go down.
Have you knitted with the hand spun yarn, the one that, like, is there something that you've made that's completely basically like from ship to finish item?
I think I have knitted one pair of socks from that, and I'm about to start a shawl that I'm going to crochet. I haven't crocheted in a while, and I spun something, and I have some of that here, like some of this.
Beautiful.
Right. And it's kind of like, it's a gradient, right? It's like some of these colors are going to go into this, but I had to separate it. It's like it's one big skein that I'm going to crochet. So yeah, this winter I'm going to make a shawl, and in the spring I knitted a shawl too that a friend who came a couple of years ago, she designed a shawl for me, and she knitted it herself and gave it to me. But I was like, I want to, and then she wrote the pattern later on and she released it. And I was like, I want to spin something and knit that for myself, because I think that would be special.
So what's your favorite combination so far when you're spinning? Like, what did you find that magic formula that like you really love?
Well, I don't. Well, so far, I love Polworth and silk, and I kind of like things that have silk in it because it gives it. It's so soft and like the sheen, right? Like that brightness. So, but I'm still exploring. I have a subscription to Into the World, which is like an indie dyer company here from New York State,
Mhm.
and they keep sending me like new types of breed that I haven't even sometimes heard of. So that's also exciting when you're like, ooh, what is this? What is this? I want to see what it looks like. How do you do it?
Right. Well, you know how you said that when you started knitting, you pretty much almost right away jumped into brioche.
Yes.
Is that the same thing with spinning? Like, did you jump into like lace weight before you knew how to do it?
Yes.
I had a feeling for
Well,
some reason.
yes. because when I started spinning, I knew that I wanted to, spinning is good for all sorts of like fiber crafts, right? Like knitting, crochet, but also weaving. And weavers love hand spun because it gives them a lot of texture in their fabrics. It makes beautiful fabrics. But I knew that I wanted my spinning to be used for knitting, and I tend to knit with like the thinner types of yarn, fingering, lace, or sports. So I wanted to learn right away how to go thin with my yarns because of that.
Right. So you seem to be like when you were growing up a very observant child because somehow everything got into your blood without you even really trying, right? Was that the same thing with like cooking and like can you make anything just from remembering how mom used to do it?
Oh no. I do uh for cooking, I have like a set of recipes that I can cook. Otherwise, I have to follow a recipe. I have to, yeah. And baking is worse. I'm not a baker. So yeah. I mean, I can cook, but I have to follow, like, if you give me a recipe, I will follow it. Like I'm good at following instructions.
You think like weaving is something you also gonna be interested in?
I thought about it. I'm not gonna lie. I thought about it when I was learning to spin, right? But then I decided, um, I live in New York, and I think you can deduce from what we've been chatting so far, right? That if I'm going to learn to weave, I want to weave like big fabric, right? And I don't have the space. So I decided, you know what? Don't go down that rabbit hole, because then you're going to want to have like a big loom. And I do not, I live in a Brooklyn apartment. I do not have the space for a big loom.
Well,
But
talking of
if I lived in a big house, I definitely would.
well, talking of the apartment living, what's your stash looks like?
Uh, it looks like chaos. I have I have a yarn in my closet. And the thing about knitting, right? I have yarn in my closet. I have yarn in the living room, like stashed away in the living room. I have yarn here around me and like my desk, and like what I'm working on, what I'm gonna work next. So there's yarn all over. But because of spinning, there's also fiber, like put away in my closet and everywhere. And fiber is bigger. So I'm getting like overcome with fiber. Right?
Do you live by yourself?
No, I share the apartment with a roommate.
So how they dealing with it?
Well, he has a collection of vinyls, so
Okay.
he understands
Like
the
it
idea. Yeah,
levels out. Yeah.
yeah. He understands the idea of collecting.
And do you feel like it's collecting or hoarding at this point? Because I had this discussion today online after I posted the video of a few of my yarn skeins.
I want to say it's collecting. It's a habit, right? Hoarding has negative connotations of like your something that controls you rather than you, right? And I want to say that I'm still in control of my yarn. That's what I want to say.
Well, okay, so let's get back to Rhinebeck. So you came to Rhinebeck. Did you buy any yarn?
I did. I bought yarn and I bought fiber.
Well, was it like planned? Like before you came to Rhinebeck, did you take stock and decided that you're missing this kind of yarn and this kind of color and that kind of fiber?
No, well, the way I view Rhinebeck, because I'm lucky enough to live in New York City, and in New York we have Vogue Knitting Live. Because of the pandemic, it's been put on hold for a little bit, but usually once a year in January, in the middle of the winter. Right. So I usually view Rhinebeck as the time where I'm going to go and buy like fiber and see what there is in terms of fiber more than yarn, right? And then for Vogue Knitting Live, I definitely need to have like a list of like a very controlled list that it never works out, but at least I feel like I'm a little bit in control, because otherwise Vogue Knitting Live is like very overwhelming in terms of like beautiful indie dyed yarns, and so yeah. So for Vogue Knitting Live, I need to be very controlled. For Rhinebeck, I'm like more like, oh, let's see what types of like blends they might have, because you get to see a lot of like locally grown stuff.
Right.
At Rhinebeck, yeah.
So you see yarn that you like. Do you buy one skein, two skeins, sweater quantity?
I started as a very good boy, very organized, right? Where I would be like, oh, I have a project in mind and I need so many skeins of yarn for that. And that's how I started. And I was very monogamous also in my projects, right? If I would start one project, work, and finish it, and then start another one. And then all of a sudden, like, a couple of years into it with Ravelry and Instagram, and, you start making friends that are knitters, and you start seeing like, oh, I want to make that. I want that. And then I lost that. That's when I think that like the hoarding thing might start creeping in, right? Because then you go to a store and you're like, oh, I don't have a project in mind, but that's very pretty. I want one, or at least one, or maybe two. Yeah.
Well, I actually graduated to two skeins from one skein for different reasons, because I would go buy a skein because it looked pretty. And then I would be like, okay, so what am I doing with this one skein? So now I feel like, well, if I have two skeins, I can always make a shawl out of it. So at least I have a plan. Or because I'm a loose knitter, if I run out of yarn, I have another skein just in case. So now it's like, usually when I order yarn, it's usually two skeins, but it accumulates.
Oh yeah, if I order yarn, I order more than one, right? I order like a quantity for like at least a shawl, right? Or a sweater. Yeah, but these are like when I go, because we're also very spoiled here in New York. We have lots of yarn, like local yarn stores here in New York City. So you get to see lots of like indie dyed yarn that is very pretty, that is just on the table, and that is like saying, take me, I don't want to be here by myself. And you're like, oh, poor little thing, So you take it home. You adopt it.
Let's talk about life in New York of a knitter.
Yeah.
Every picture I see on Instagram makes me want to be like, oh, I want to be there. Because you're constantly in like some cool yarn store with some like super cool people. And as you're saying, it's like all very inspiring. But you mentioned somewhere that you actually like introverted person. How is that balances for you? Like to be an introvert and yet to be so social when it comes to knitting?
Well, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I need a break. Uh, but the thing though is that I think because maybe a lot of the knitters are also more introverted, or so you get to go to like a yarn shop and sit with a couple of people and talk for a little bit. It's not just social like commotion and lots of energy that you have to put out socially, right? Like you sit down, you're kind of calm, you're knitting and chatting, and a lot of times there are events where you like Vogue knitting or some sort of like get together where you just have to like you know go and do it. And a lot of sometimes I'm at the subway platform and I'm like, I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to go home, but I do it because
Do you,
it's fun at the end of the day. It's fun, it's a good time.
do you feel like you've met people that you would never meet otherwise through knitting?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Like,
Especially
does that
because
make, is
I'm
that
not
a
so
good thing?
social. Definitely. Yes, definitely. And yeah, especially here in New York, I think you get to meet all sorts of people that are interested in knitting, and that seems to be the bonding, right? That they do lots of things in their life that maybe you wouldn't necessarily connect with on that level, but the knitting brings you together, and then you're like, oh, well, it's kind of fun. They're doing different things, but we share something in common, and that creates a bond.
Does that create a competition as well, like because you know that like you went to this knit night and you've met these people and they were doing that, and now you're going to go to the next knit night and they already finished their socks and you're still on number one? Like, does that put pressure on you to like always need something new, bigger and better?
Oh, I don't know. Um, I don't know about it in I feel more pressure in terms of uh like social networks, rather, like on Instagram or YouTube or something, like when you have a podcast that you have to show something new because people don't want to see the same thing. But I think that when you're like in a social, like in person, it's more supportive. I want to believe that it's more supportive, right? When people are like, "Oh, you've done so much. That looks so great." Or if you make a mistake and they're like, "Oh, I can't really no, don't rip it out. I can't see it. Like no one would know." I think that I feel like it would be more supportive like in person when they can. It's more encouraging, I think.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
rather than competitive. Yeah.
well, let's chat about your YouTube podcast. So you went like very actively into it and then you sort of stopped. Why did you stop?
Well, because of the pandemic.
Well, you know that normally
Yeah.
gazillion of people went into the YouTube because of the pandemic. You
Yeah.
stopped it because of the pandemic. So like, why do you think that is?
Well, because because I live in a small New York City apartment. Everybody else was home, right? Like my roommate was home for the past 18 months. My neighbors have been home, so there's all this noise. And I did try to record a couple of times, but I had to do it like really late at night, and I would end up so exhausted that I would like, oh, I'm not enjoying like recording it so late so that there is no noise around, right? I think I'm hoping that now that things are going back to normal, I'm going to like take it up again.
Well, why did you decide to do YouTube podcast in the first place?
Because, well, a big part of it was Chillinit, Connie. Right? I met her. She was coming to. She has a podcast also called Chillinits, and I met her. I was watching YouTube videos to learn, and I also stumbled into like YouTube videos with like knitting podcasts. And I saw her videos, and she said that she was going to come to New York to Rhinebeck of that year. And I started chatting with her. I was like, "Oh, I'm going to Rhinebeck. Maybe you know, like, and she was going to stop in New York City first. So like, so if you want some recommendations in terms of like yarn stores and things like that, let me know or whatever. And we started talking, and that's how we became friends. And she encouraged me, and I felt like it was a way of keeping in touch with her about like showing our progress, right? Like what I was talking about earlier, when you go to like knit night and you want to show your friends, look how much I've done so far, or look what I'm working on right now, kind of thing. So that's how I started. To me, it was like talking to friends, showing them your progress, what you're learning, what you're doing. Yeah.
So you did it in Spanish, but then you also did it in English. Like, was that hard to make that decision, like which market you're gonna go after?
No, because I also have some English speaking friends that I wanted to do the same with. So I felt like the most difficult decision was whether I should have 2 channels or just the one. And I decided to just keep one channel with both types of videos in the same channel. That was the most difficult decision. And it was just because I was like, I'm not really interested in becoming like a YouTube personality that people might get confused by, like one language or another. So like, this is just like for friends and people that might be interested in seeing what I'm doing. So I'm just gonna keep both types of podcasts in the same channel. That was the most difficult decision to make, I think.
Was that a satisfying experience to have the YouTube channel, or was that putting more pressure on you?
It was both. Because I am very shy, right? And actually recording the podcast, the most difficult part for me is beginning the video, the introduction, the saying hello to people, you know, like welcoming them into the new episode is the most difficult part for me to do. And sometimes I spend more time on that section than actually the recorded part, because I'm like, oh no, that's not good. Cut and do it again, do it again, do it again. And sometimes at the end, I've decided to like show what I'm working on, and then at the end do the introduction and just put it at the beginning, because it seems easier that way sometimes.
Right. Do you find it difficult to ask people to like follow you, subscribe to you, put the like does that feel organic to you?
I don't think I've ever said that in any of my episodes. I don't think I've ever asked.
If you're watching this, go and subscribe.
Because yes, I find it so difficult. I find it very difficult to you know, I'm always like, you know, if people like it, they're gonna like it, right? Like yeah, I find it very difficult to go to ask them to subscribe or to like. Yeah.
But when you record yourself, do you feel like who are you talking to? Like, do you feel like you're talking to the camera? Do you imagine some audience on the other side of the camera? Like, do you have anybody in mind when you talk to?
I try to imagine my friends. That's when it seems the easiest, right? Like the way that I would do at a knit night here in, you know, Knitty City or String Thing, that, you know, just showing them what I'm doing. I think if I imagine friends, it makes it easier rather than to imagine like people that I don't know. If I imagine people I don't know, I freak out. And if I imagine a camera, then I get very critical, right? Like, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. Right?
Well, talking about being critical, like, are you critical of your work? Do you like looking at your stuff like overly critically?
Yes. Yeah. I try not to. And I think that's why I like the spinning better. I seem to be more relaxed with the spinning. I allow myself more freedom with the spinning. I think because there is no like rules about the spinning, or not as, you know, it seems to be more like individualistic, right? Like the spinning is a creation, and that you're creating, that you're making like some sort of like maybe like even an artistic expression, if you will. with my knitting, I feel, yeah, I get like, if I make a mistake, it's difficult to let it go sometimes.
Have you ever considered like jumping into the design because you're doing so many alterations of other people's patterns? Like, do you think about
I,
designing?
I have thought about it, but there are so many beautiful designs that I want to make that I'm like, but if I make something from, like, if I design something, then I'm not gonna make that. And I think I'd rather make that. I think that if I get an idea, which I think it hasn't happened to me yet. If I get an idea about like a shawl or a sweater or something that I really want to make for myself and I haven't seen it, I think that then I would definitely do it. But it hasn't happened that I get like, that I say, ooh, I want that, and I haven't seen it anywhere else.
But does it like ever bother you that you are not a designer? Because it's like, I feel like the longer I knit, the more I get asked by people. So like, when are you going to design your own stuff? And even when I do something without following the pattern, I'm getting questions like, so when you're going to do the pattern and when you're going to publish the pattern? And it's coming in the friendliest of meanings, right? Like people
Yeah.
would be willing to knit my designs and they want to be supportive of that. But does that sort of bother you that like you feel like everybody is a designer nowadays?
I don't think so. I mean, there are designers that whose aesthetics I like and I follow more. But I think, I think that's one of the wonderful things about like social media, Instagram, Ravelry, is that it has allowed people to be creative and to be willing to like do their own thing and put it out there and have people buy it if they like it or not, right? Like they don't have to be pre-approved by a magazine or a publication or some some kind of like corporate decision making, something that says this is going to sell good or this is not going to sell at all or whatever, right? And so I do appreciate, I don't make everything I see that is published, because I can't even make everything that from the designers that I follow and I like. But I think it's a good thing, actually, right? And eventually, like the better ones are the ones that rise to the top.
Right.
But I like that.
Well, talking about those at the top, do you feel pressured to, and I know that you're a big fan of Stephen West because you
Yes.
have every book of his signed up by him and every shawl knit. Do you feel like it's a must to knit like everything that Stephen produces just because you like him as a designer? Like, do you feel that internal sort of pressure?
No, not at all. And it's funny. That like Stephen West is when I found Ravelry is when I was learning to knit, right? And I wanted to knit a shawl, so I went to Ravelry and I said triangular shawl, and many things came up, but one of his patterns came up. I didn't know who he was, but that's the one that grabbed my attention, and that's the one I knitted. And it's a very simple triangular shawl, and I think it's called Boneyard or something like that. That's the first shawl I knitted, and that was a Stephen West. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know that he was popular. I didn't know anything, but I started looking at other of his stuff, and I was like, "Oh, this is cool. This is pretty. Oh, I want to make that." So, but I don't, I like what I like, but I don't feel pressure to, number one, I don't feel pressure to like everything that my favorite designers make. And I don't feel pressure to make everything that they make. If they want to sponsor me and pay for that, I will.
Well, do you feel like you're missing out if you're not participating in the latest Mystery Knit Along or something?
Well, for the mystery knit-alongs, I might feel like I'm missing out, but I do enjoy making most of the mystery knit-alongs. And with the pandemic last year, I started doing like a knit night on Zoom with a lot of Spanish speakers, and that came about because the previous year I went to a launch party for the Starflake shawl. I went to a launch party here in Brooklyn, and Stephen was there, but there was a whole bunch of knitters, and we all started that mystery knit along together in this space. We all were doing the same thing, and it was very cool. So when the pandemic happened, I had this idea that I was like, wouldn't it be cool to be able to like gather people, and now that we're all like in our homes, we can't leave, to gather people online from all over the world and do it something like that together. And so in that sense, I don't know if it would be more of like missing out the design or missing out the experience of knitting something with everybody, because that's a cool experience to knit something together with everybody and compare colors and help each other with like things that you don't understand, or stitches that you're not very sure how to make, and things like that.
Right. Well, besides like designers that you're supporting and yarn dyers that you're supporting, like, do you feel like, how do you decide like who you're gonna support?
I like, one of the things that I love about the knitting community, right? And one of the things that I also feel maybe a little bit ambivalent about, like the male knitter kind of thing, because there's so much misogyny in this world that I don't want to like contribute to that by like emphasizing my maleness. So I think that it is important to like help women like entrepreneurs, and I love the idea that in this community, like the women that own that, like the owners of like the local yarn shops here in New York are women. They're women of color, like Felicia from String Thing, Pearl, who rest in peace, from Knitted City, right? They're women of color, and they are like super welcoming, and they're the ones like driving this industry. I love that it's women that are driving this industry. So I try to like, it excites me to be able to help women, like to be in a field that is dominated by women, and that they're the ones in charge, and that they're the ones that make decisions, and that they're the ones that have like the power, right? And I love that. So I always try to, I try to be conscious of like supporting indie dyers that are local, for example. Like Knitted City has like local trunk shows like on the weekends, and I try to go there and like buy a skein of yarn or something, because I like that notion of like supporting local women that are working out of their kitchens sometimes, right? Like that they're trying to make a business for themselves, and that a lot of times they're being very, very successful. I like that.
Right. How can people support you? Like, how can my viewers support you?
I think what I like the most is interaction, actually. Right? And so, like, I have my channel, right, on YouTube, and I have my Instagram, and they can follow me on Instagram, and they can interact with what I'm creating and stuff. And that's a good way of
They'll put all the links in the description of this video, so please
thank you,
follow, subscribe, like, and comment.
Thank you.
Well, do you have a dream, like besides buying that house with the loom one day, is there like a dream? Do you have a plan for like what you're trying to achieve with knitting, or are you just enjoying the journey one day at a time?
I think I'm enjoying the journey, and what because what I just said about like this type of industry that is driven by women, I do like the idea of like bringing more men in. So that is one of the things that I do like, the idea of bringing more men in, and that can help support these women that are like making it into this industry, and making like decisions for this industry. And also something that, you know, like we were talking about earlier about like the crafts, right? Like fiber crafts, like knitting, spinning, and things, like encouraging more men to do it. That it's not gendered. It doesn't care if you're a man or if you're a woman. If you want to knit something, if you want to create something, if you want to make something for yourself, you can do it, and it doesn't matter like what colors you choose or anything of that sort, right? Just to enjoy the process, and it's actually a very enjoyable process, right?
Right. Do you wear what you need?
I do. Yes, I do all the time. Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, not in the summer. I can't. I wish I could, but
Well,
you know, I love the winter for that.
do you prefer to knit sweaters or do you prefer to knit accessories?
I think my favorite is definitely shawls. Yeah, I love knitting shawls.
Well, do you wear the shawls?
Yes, all the time. I do. I love my shawls. Right now, actually, I'm knitting a Stephen West shawl, one of the mystery knit-alongs that I didn't participate in.
Is that dotted race?
No, this one is the doodler.
Oh,
Yeah, it's the beginning is very similar to dotted race, but dotted race is one of my favorites. I've knitted that like 3 times already.
I actually knitted it twice, and this is like unheard of for me because I never knit anything twice except for like this shawl and maybe another 2 items.
Yeah, no, I don't have a problem repeating knits if I enjoy them. Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned
this one I knitted twice actually. This sweater. Yeah, I knitted one for Connie for the indie dyer, and I sent it to her in Santiago, and then I knitted this for myself.
Beautiful. I mean, honestly, it's like one of my favorite sweaters ever.
Yes,
Like
and the detail on this, yes, because you can't see that, so I'm gonna show it off, right? But yes.
Yeah. No, it's like it was the biggest surprise when I saw you putting that, because you came in the Rhinebeck, you came in the t-shirt and then you put the sweater on, and I was like, oh my God, like Julie needs in Paris.
Yes.
Well, I loved meeting you there. I loved meeting you here over Zoom.
Thank you so much.
We'll, interact somewhere at Vogue Knitting or something one day soon.
I hope so. Yes, definitely.
Thank you for being the guest of my channel tonight.
Thank you so much.